Daniel Walker grabbed Richard Hayes by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "Say her name one more time," Daniel said, his voice dead calm. "I dare you." Richard didn't flinch. He smiled the slow, practiced smile of a man who had never once been afraid of someone who worked with his hands for a living. "She's a billionaire, Walker." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And you rub sunscreen on her back for attention. We both know what that makes you." The hallway went silent. 12 executives stood frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then a voice cut through from the end of the hall, quiet, sharp, and absolutely certain. "Let him go, Daniel." Olivia Sterling walked forward until she was standing between them. She didn't look at Richard. She looked only at Daniel, and what was in her eyes stopped him cold. Not fear. Not embarrassment. Something that looked exactly like "I've been waiting for someone to do that for a very long time." Daniel released his grip, stepped back, straightened his shirt. Richard smoothed his collar and laughed softly. "This is the man you're choosing, Olivia, a maintenance worker." She finally looked at Richard. "No," she said. "He's the man who already chose me, before he knew I was worth anything to him." She turned and walked away, and Daniel stood in that hallway, heart-slamming, hands still shaking, trying to understand how he had gone from applying sunscreen on a beach to this moment in the span of 3 weeks. It started the way things that change your life always start. With something small. Something you almost didn't notice. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see exactly how far this story has traveled. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. Because what happened between Daniel Walker and Olivia Sterling is the kind of story you don't walk away from halfway through. The morning Daniel Walker almost quit started like every other morning for the past 6 years. His alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. Not 4:45. Not 5:00. Exactly 4:47, because that gave him 13 minutes before his daughter Sophie woke up on her own, which she always did at 5:00, which meant he had exactly enough time to make coffee pull on his work shirt and be standing in the kitchen when she padded out in her cartoon socks so she didn't wake up to an empty house. He had learned that in the hard way. She was 4 years old the first time she woke up alone and thought he was gone. Just gone. Like her mother. He never let it happen again. The coffee maker gurgled. Daniel leaned against the counter and stared at nothing in particular, the habit of a man who had learned to rest his eyes without actually resting. His hands were wrapped around the mug before it was even done brewing. Calloused palms. Chipped thumbnail on the right hand from a plumbing job 3 weeks ago that hadn't quite healed right. A small white scar near his left wrist from a busted pipe fitting back in 2019. Hands that told a story. He was 35 years old, and he looked every single day of it. The radio murmured low in the background, some country station playing something soft enough not to wake Sophie. He didn't really listen. He was already running through his shift in his head. HVAC unit in Building C had been throwing codes again. The pool filtration system at the north end of the resort property needed a new pressure valve. And someone in the executive wing had reported a rattling sound in the ventilation that had been driving them absolutely insane for 3 days, which meant it had been annoying them for 3 days, and Daniel had been hearing about it for 3 days, and hadn't had a single 20-minute window to actually go look at it. That was the job. 37 employees under his supervision. A luxury resort property sprawling across 42 acres of coastal California. Guest suites that cost more per night than Daniel made in a week. And his job, his actual job, the one they paid him for, was to make sure that all of it kept running so quietly and so perfectly that no guest ever had to think about it. Invisible. That was the word his predecessor had used when he handed Daniel the role 6 years ago. The best maintenance man in this business is invisible. Nobody notices you when you're doing it right. Daniel had taken that to heart. Maybe too much to heart. He heard the soft shuffle of cartoon socks on hardwood. Daddy. Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway, 9 years old and still half asleep, her dark hair sticking up on one side. She had her mother's eyes. He never knew how to feel about that, grateful and gutted at the same time every single morning. Hey, Bug. He was already opening the cabinet for her cereal. You made coffee before I woke up. I always make coffee before you wake up. I know. She climbed onto the bar stool and propped her chin in her hands. I just like saying it. He set her cereal in front of her, and she started eating with the focused, serious expression of someone performing an important task. He watched her for a moment, this little human being who depended entirely on him, who trusted him completely, who had never once in her 9 years of life questioned whether he would be there. He intended to keep it that way. Ms. Patterson said we're going on a field trip next Thursday, Sophie said between bites. Where to? The Science Museum. She said we need permission slips. She looked up at him. You won't forget, right? Have I ever forgotten? She thought about this with genuine seriousness. The Halloween costume thing. That was one time and the store was out of the right size. You forgot until the night before. I remembered. That counts. Sophie grinned at him over her cereal bowl, that gap-toothed grin that was going to knock him flat for the rest of his life, and went back to eating. Daniel finished his coffee standing up the way he always did. He kissed the top of her head on his way to the door. Mrs. Alvarez is taking you to school. I'll pick you up at 6. Okay? Love you. Love you, Daddy. He was in his truck by 5:23. The Sterling Coast Resort sat on a stretch of California coastline that made people feel like money, even if they didn't have any. Manicured grounds. Architecture that whispered expensive. And on the hillside above the main property, barely visible from the guest areas, there was a complex of maintenance facilities, equipment storage, and scheduling offices that nobody ever talked about or thought about because Daniel Walker made sure they didn't have to. Howe was reviewing the morning work orders when Marcus Diaz, his lead technician, dropped a new ticket on top of his clipboard. Corporate's here, Marcus said. Daniel looked up. For the retreat. Got in last night. Sterling herself plus about 12 of her people from the San Francisco office. Marcus pulled a face that communicated everything he didn't say out loud. And they're already submitting requests. Daniel looked at the new ticket. Executive Suite, 4, temperature inconsistent guest reports room, too cold. Immediate attention requested. He looked at his existing stack. Add it to the list, he said. It's flagged priority. Everything they flag is priority. Marcus shrugged in the way people shrug when they know they're right, but aren't getting paid enough to argue. Your call, boss. Daniel was already reaching for his radio. He had heard of Olivia Sterling, obviously. You didn't work for Sterling Hospitality Group for 6 years without hearing about the woman who had taken control of the company at 26 after her father's health declined, and had not only kept it running, but expanded it from 7 properties to 23 in 3 years. She was the subject of profiles in business magazines, the subject of rumors in break rooms, and the subject of absolutely no direct interaction with Daniel, who existed several floors and several tax brackets below the rarefied air she breathed. That was fine with him. He preferred invisible. He went to fix the HVAC in Building C. He saw her for the first time at 11:15 that morning, and it wasn't in a conference room or an executive hallway. It was in the maintenance supply corridor, which was not a place that CEOs visited. Daniel was coming around a corner with a pressure gauge in one hand and a work order clipboard in the other when he nearly walked straight into her. She stepped back. He stepped back. For one full second, they just looked at each other. She was not what he had expected. He wasn't sure what he had expected, something more polished maybe, or more intimidating, or more obviously the kind of person who occupied a different category of human existence. But Olivia Sterling was just a woman in a white button-down shirt, with the sleeves rolled up, holding a tablet, looking slightly lost. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I was trying to find the service entrance for the East Wing, and I think I took the wrong turn. You're about 3 corridors over, Daniel said. Take the left at the fire door, then follow the blue stripe. She nodded. Thank you. Then she looked at his clipboard. Are you one of the maintenance team? Supervisor. Right. She glanced down the corridor at the shelving units, the equipment, the general organized chaos of a department that ran on precision and never got seen. Is it always this busy? We're short 2 people this week, and the executive wing is full, so... He didn't finish the sentence. It wasn't a complaint. It was just a fact. She looked at him steadily for a moment. Not the way people usually looked at maintenance staff, through them, past them at the problem they were there to fix. She looked at him like she was actually seeing him. It was a strange feeling. "I'll let you get back to it," she said. "Follow the blue stripe," he reminded her. She went left. He went right. He didn't think about it again until later that evening, when Marcus casually mentioned that half the executive staff had complained that morning about slow response times, and the other half had submitted identical complaints about the pool temperature, and that apparently Olivia Sterling had told them all to stop submitting requests for things they could fix themselves. Daniel stood very still for a moment. Then he went back to the work orders. The company retreat was a 3-day event. Some combination of strategy sessions, team building, and the kind of forced bonding that happened when executives were removed from their offices and expected to behave like human beings. Daniel's team worked around the edges of all of it, maintaining the invisible infrastructure that kept the whole production running. On the second day, the retreat moved to the private beach. It was a perfect California afternoon. The kind of afternoon that made people remember why they lived in California. Daniel was there in a professional capacity, checking on the equipment shed near the water, making sure the lighting rigs for the evening event were properly secured, generally being invisible, while 50 executives in resort wear rediscovered their ability to enjoy sunlight. He had just finished checking the last anchor bolt on the stage platform when he heard his name. Not "hey" or "excuse me" or "maintenance," which was how most people got his attention in a professional setting. His actual name. Daniel. He turned. Olivia Sterling was sitting on a resort lounge chair about 20 feet away, and she was holding up a bottle of sunscreen in his direction. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked around to confirm that she was in fact talking to him. "Could you help me with this?" she said. "My shoulders. I can't reach." He walked over. Later, he would not be able to explain exactly why he agreed without question. He would tell himself it was because she was his employer. He would tell himself it was because saying no to the CEO would be professionally awkward. He would tell himself a lot of things. But in the moment, he just walked over, took the bottle and stood behind her while she shifted to give him access to her upper back. He applied the sunscreen carefully, professionally, with the focused, precise attention he gave to everything he did. Nothing more, nothing less. Then she tilted her head slightly and said very quietly, "That's not where I meant." He stopped. His hands stilled. The ocean kept going. The other executives kept talking and laughing 30 feet away. The afternoon kept being afternoon. He said carefully, "I'm sorry." She was quiet for just a moment too long. Then she turned her head enough to look at him from the corner of her eye, and there was something in her expression that he couldn't name. Not quite amusement, not quite vulnerability, somewhere in between. "I meant my shoulders," she said. "You started on my upper back. My shoulders were what I asked about." He stared at her. Her mouth curved just slightly. "You can breathe," she said quietly. "I'm not trying to get you fired." He didn't say anything. He finished the sunscreen on her shoulders, actually on her shoulders, and handed the bottle back and walked away with a very particular kind of careful steps of a man making sure he didn't trip over anything. Marcus was waiting near the equipment shed. "You look weird," Marcus said. "I'm fine." "You look like you saw a ghost." I said I'm fine. He picked up his clipboard and stared at it for a solid 30 seconds without reading a single word on it. Duh. He told himself it meant nothing. He was good at telling himself things. 6 years of practice. He had told himself that the grief would ease, and it had mostly. He had told himself that he could raise Sophie alone, and he had. He had told himself that he didn't need anything or anyone beyond what he already had, and for a long time, he had mostly believed it. He was not going to lose that discipline over a moment that probably meant nothing. The next morning, he was in the maintenance office by 6:00 a.m. The work orders already sorted, the day already mapped out in his head. At 7:15, there was a knock on the open door. He looked up. Olivia Sterling was standing in the doorway of the maintenance office, which again was not a place that CEOs visited, holding 2 cups of coffee. She held one out toward him. He looked at it. I didn't know how you took it, she said. I guessed black. He took it. That's right. She leaned against the doorframe and looked around the office at the boards covered in work orders and property maps, at the equipment tracking sheets, at the system he had built over 6 years for keeping 42 acres of luxury infrastructure running on the budget of a department that nobody thought about. This is impressive, she said, and she didn't sound like she was being polite. She sounded like someone who actually understood what she was looking at. It works, he said. More than works. She nodded toward the tracking boards. You built a redundancy system for equipment failures. If something breaks during peak season, and I don't have a backup plan, the guests notice. And if the guests notice, that's the opposite of my job. She looked at him steadily. Most people at your level just respond to problems. You built a system to prevent them. He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. She didn't seem bothered by that. She took a sip of her own coffee and looked back at the boards. I owe you an apology, she said. For what? Yesterday, at the beach. She looked at him directly. That was unprofessional, and I put you in an uncomfortable position. It wasn't fair. He was quiet for a moment. You were apologizing or explaining? Apologizing. Okay. He looked at his coffee. Apology accepted. She nodded. Then, without warning, what's your daughter's name? He went very still. How do you know I have a daughter? HR files. I look at files for everyone on my direct property management team. It's not surveillance, it's just I like knowing who's actually running things. A pause. You've been with this company 6 years. You've turned down 2 promotions that would have moved you to the San Francisco office. And your emergency contact has been listed as Sophie Walker daughter since day 1. He stared at her. Her name is Sophie, he said finally. That's a good name. Her mother picked it. A beat of silence. I'm sorry, Olivia said quietly. It was a long time ago. Doesn't mean it was easy. He looked up from his coffee, and she was watching him with an expression that was careful and genuine, and didn't ask anything of him, wasn't waiting for him to reassure her that he was fine, wasn't looking for the neat resolution people always wanted when they stumbled into someone else's grief. She just said what she meant and left it there. No, he said. It wasn't easy. She nodded once. Then she set her coffee cup on the edge of his desk and pushed off the doorframe. I'll let you get to your day. Thank you for the office. And for yesterday. She was gone before he could figure out what she meant by that last part. He sat with his black coffee and the lingering sense that something had just shifted very slightly on its axis, and he wasn't sure if it had shifted towards something good or something that was going to cost him. The third day of the retreat was when everything cracked open. It started at 9:00 a.m. with a busted water main in the East Service Corridor, a legitimate emergency that pulled Daniel and 3 of his guys away from everything else for 2 solid hours. It cascaded into a generator issue in the backup power supply, which cascaded into a scheduling nightmare when 2 vendors showed up at the same time for work that had been booked 6 weeks apart, and someone in the corporate office had confused the dates. By noon, Daniel had been awake for 7 hours and had not sat down once. He was under a sink in the executive meeting hall when his radio crackled. Walker, you got a second? It was Marcus. Negative, Daniel said. You should make a second. Marcus. It's Sterling. She's asking for you specifically. He came out from under the sink. He found Olivia in his main conference room, which had been cleared of the morning session. She was alone, standing at the window with her phone pressed to her ear, and she looked different. Not like the woman who had appeared in his doorway with coffee. The CEO expression was back, but it was under strain. Her jaw was set. Whatever the call was, it wasn't good. She saw him held up one finger and said into the phone, "Tell Richard I'll call him when I'm back in San Francisco. Not before." A pause. "I said not before, Gerald." She hung up and turned. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I need a favor, and I know it's not in your job description." "What do you need?" "The afternoon session is supposed to be outside. The AV team is saying the speakers on the South Terrace have a ground loop problem, and the sound is going to be unusable." She looked at him steadily. I have 12 executives coming out there in 3 hours expecting a presentation that works. I know your team is already stretched today, but I need someone who can actually solve this, not just tell me it can't be done." He looked at her. "Ground loop is usually a cabling issue," he said. "Can you fix it?" "I can look at it." "That's all I'm asking." He fixed it in 90 minutes. It was a shielding problem where the audio cables were running too close to the power lines, exactly the kind of thing that got overlooked when AV teams were setting up fast and not paying attention to the infrastructure around them. He rerouted the cables, checked the grounds, ran a test signal. When he came back to tell her it was done, Olivia was standing with two of her senior VPs mid-conversation. But she saw him over their shoulders, and she stopped talking. "Fixed," she said. "Should be clean." She exhaled just slightly, just enough to see. "Thank you." One of the VPs, a polished man in his 40s, who Daniel had seen around the property all week, and who had the particular kind of confidence that came from never having fixed anything with his own hands, looked at Daniel and then back at Olivia. "Is this your maintenance supervisor?" he said, like he was identifying a piece of furniture. "This is Daniel Walker," Olivia said. "He just saved the afternoon session." The VP nodded vaguely, already looking back at his phone. Olivia looked at Daniel. She didn't say anything, but there was something in her eyes that he couldn't quite name, something that looked almost like an apology on behalf of the whole world. He went back to his work orders. That evening, after the sessions were done, and most of the executives had drifted toward the resort bar, Daniel was doing final checks on the south terrace when he heard footsteps on the decking behind him. He knew it was her before he turned around. She was carrying a plate. "I had the kitchen make extra," she said simply, and set the plate on the equipment table next to him. Real food, not the conference room trays of finger sandwiches, but an actual meal. Grilled chicken. Vegetables. The kind of food a person needed after a day of physical work. He stared at it. "You didn't eat," she said. "How do you?" "Marcus mentioned you skip lunch when it gets this busy." She leaned against the terrace railing and looked out at the water. "That's not sustainable, Daniel." He stood very still. "You don't have to do that," he said. "Do what?" "Notice things like that. It's not." He stopped. Started again. "I'm the maintenance supervisor. You don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said quietly. She turned to look at him. "But I notice things about people I respect." I didn't know what to say to that either. "Eat," she said simply. "I'll stop bothering you." She walked back inside. He ate standing at the equipment table, looking out at the ocean in the last of the evening light. And he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt seen. Not as the invisible man who kept the lights on. Not as the single dad who managed fine, thank you, didn't need any help. Not as the worker who belonged in a different part of the building than the people he worked for. Just seen. It scared him more than he knew how to say. The retreat ended the next morning. The executive team loaded into cars and was gone by noon. Marcus found Daniel in the equipment room running inventory. "Good week," Marcus said. "Eventful," Daniel said. "Sterling's office called this morning." Daniel stopped writing. "They want to schedule a site improvement review," Marcus said, watching him carefully. "And they specifically requested that the maintenance team's input be included. You specifically." Daniel looked at his clipboard. "That's unusual," he said. "Yeah," Marcus said. "It is." Daniel set the clipboard down, picked it up, set it down again. "Did they say when?" he said. 3 weeks. He nodded slowly. He told himself it was professional. He told himself it was about the site improvements, about the redundancy systems she had noticed, about the practical value he brought to the property operations discussion. He told himself a lot of things. But somewhere in the back of his chest, behind all the practicality and the discipline and the 6 years of keeping everything carefully under control, something was already waking up. And it frightened him. Because Daniel Walker had built his entire life around not needing anything he couldn't provide for himself. And he was starting to understand that there were things he had never thought to look for. And once you see something, really see it, you can't make yourself stop seeing it. no matter how many times you tell yourself to look away. 3 weeks after the retreat ended, Daniel was back to his 4:47 alarm, his black coffee, and his clipboard. Back to invisible. Back to the version of his life that made sense. Except something was different, and he couldn't locate exactly where it was coming from. It wasn't anything he could put in a work order. It wasn't a broken pipe or a failing circuit. It was more like a sound at the edge of hearing, the kind you couldn't ignore once you noticed it, even if you couldn't name it. Sophie noticed first the way kids always notice things adults try to hide. She was sitting across from him at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night doing her homework when she looked up without warning and said, "Daddy, what are you thinking about?" He looked up from the maintenance schedule he was reviewing. "Work." "You're smiling at work stuff." He wasn't aware he had been smiling. "I'm not smiling." "You were." She went back to her homework with the matter-of-fact certainty of a 9-year-old who had just proven her point and didn't need to argue about it. It looked nice. He looked back down at his papers. He told himself it was nothing. The site improvement review happened on a Wednesday morning in a conference room on the 4th floor of the main resort building, a room Daniel had been in exactly twice in 6 years, both times for emergency structural assessments, never for anything that involved him sitting at a table with 7 corporate executives and a presentation on the wall. He arrived 4 minutes early. He was always 4 minutes early. He found a seat near the door, not at the head of the table, not buried in the middle, just close enough to the exit that he could leave quickly when the part that involved him was done. 3 of Olivia's VPs were already seated. They glanced at him when he came in, registered his presence, and went back to their laptops. He was used to that. He was looking at his own notes, handwritten, because he didn't trust himself with a tablet in a room full of people who used tablets like extensions of their hands, when the door opened and Olivia walked in. She was already talking to someone on her phone mid-sentence, and she crossed to the head of the table without looking up. But as she pulled out her chair, she scanned the room, once the quick, comprehensive scan of someone who always counted heads before starting anything, and her eyes landed on him. She didn't smile. She didn't nod. She just held his gaze for exactly 1 second, and then she sat down and said into her phone, "Gerald, I have to go. Send me the contract tonight." She hung up and set the phone face down on the table and said, "Let's start." Daniel had expected to be called on once, maybe twice. He had prepared specific notes about 3 infrastructure issues that affected guest experience and could be addressed with targeted capital investment rather than expensive emergency repairs. He had facts, he had timelines, he had cost comparisons. He was prepared to deliver them efficiently and sit back down. What he had not prepared for was Olivia asking him to walk the entire room through his redundancy system. "Daniel built something here that I think we need to understand before we make any capital decisions," she said, and turned to look at him directly. "Can you walk us through it?" He stood up. He went through it. He talked about the system, the way he always talked about work, without performance, without selling it, just explaining how it functioned and why. He talked about the 3 times in the past 2 years where the redundancy had caught a failure before it became a guest-facing problem, and how much each of those silent saves had cost, versus what an emergency repair during peak season would have run. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then, one of the VPs, the same polished man from the terrace, whose name Daniel had learned was Garrett, said, "You built this yourself. This wasn't a corporate initiative." "No," Daniel said. "Why?" Daniel thought about it. "Because I'm responsible for what happens on this property. If something fails, and there was something I could have done to prevent it, that's on me." He paused. "So I prevented it." Garrett looked at him the way people sometimes looked at Daniel, like they were recalibrating something they thought they already understood. Olivia was watching Daniel with an expression he was starting to recognize. Careful, genuine, like she was storing something away. "Thank you," she said. "Please sit." He sat. He told himself it was professional. He told himself it was nothing more than a CEO using a good system as a case study in a budget meeting. He told himself that the particular way she had said thank you, quiet, direct, meant only for him, was a normal thing that happened in normal business meetings. He was getting worse at telling himself things. The first time she came to find him after the meeting, he thought it was about a work issue. She appeared in the maintenance office doorway at 4:30 in the afternoon, 2 days after the site review, and he looked up and immediately started running through what might have gone wrong in the executive wing. "What broke?" he said. She stopped in the doorway. "Nothing." "Ventilation problem?" "No." "Temperature in the suites?" "Daniel." She said his name the way she always said it, like it was the actual word she meant. Not a placeholder. "Nothing broke. I just wanted to ask you something." He set down his pen. "The improvement proposal I'm putting together," she said, coming into the office and leaning against the edge of the filing cabinet, the way she'd leaned against his doorframe the first time. "I want to include a section on staff retention and infrastructure knowledge. The kind of institutional knowledge that walks out the door when experienced people leave." She looked at him. "Will you help me put it together?" "That's an HR conversation." "I know, but HR can tell me turnover numbers. You can tell me what the numbers actually mean on the ground." She paused. "There's a difference." He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "Thank you." "You keep thanking me for things that are part of my job." "No," she said quietly. "I keep thanking you for things that are above your job. You just don't see the difference because you do it automatically." She picked up her tablet from under her arm. "Is Thursday afternoon good? I can make Thursday work." She nodded and left. Marcus appeared approximately 11 seconds later from around the corner where he had absolutely been standing within earshot. "She came down here again," Marcus said. "She has questions about the improvement proposal." "Right. It's a legitimate professional consultation." "Sure is." "Marcus, I'm not saying anything." "You're saying everything without saying anything." Marcus held up both hands in a gesture of complete innocence and went back to the workbench. Daniel watched him go, and then sat very still for a moment, with his hands flat on the desk, just breathing. Thursday, he told himself. It was just Thursday. Thursday was not just Thursday. They sat in the small conference room off the maintenance office, the one Daniel used for shift briefings with the door open because he had specifically left the door open, and they worked through the retention data for 2 hours. He talked. She asked questions. Good questions, the kind that showed she had actually read what he'd sent her beforehand, that she understood how field operations actually worked versus how they looked on spreadsheets. At some point, someone had brought coffee, and neither of them had noticed who or when. At some point, the conversation had moved from retention data to the guest experience philosophy he had quietly built into his team's culture. The idea that invisible good work was still good work, that taking pride in something nobody noticed was still taking pride. "Where did that come from?" she asked. "What?" "That philosophy. It's not corporate training. It's not in any of the manuals." She looked at him over her coffee cup. "Where did it come from?" He thought about it honestly. "My father," he said finally. "He was a plumber for 30 years. Never missed a day. Never complained. He used to say the work doesn't care who does it, but you should." He paused. "I thought he was being humble when I was young. Then I got older and realized he was being proud." Olivia was quiet for a moment. "He sounds like someone worth knowing," she said. "He passed 8 years ago." "I'm sorry." "He met Sophie. That mattered." She set her coffee cup down and looked at the table for a moment, and there was something in her face that wasn't professional, and wasn't CEO, and wasn't the composed, controlled version of herself she maintained in every other room he'd ever seen her in. "My father is still alive," she said. "But I've been running his company for 3 years, and I don't know if we've had a single conversation that wasn't about the business." A pause. "I don't know when that happened." Daniel didn't have a neat response to that. He didn't try to manufacture one. He just let it sit there the way she had let his grief sit when he mentioned Sophie's mother. After a while, she looked up and said, "Sorry, that was oversharing." "It was honest," he said. "There's a difference." She looked at him steadily. Then she smiled, not the polished professional smile he'd seen in the meeting room. Something smaller. Something that looked like it surprised even her. Yes, she said quietly. "There is." They wrapped up the session 20 minutes later. She left. He gathered his notes and stacked them and then sat for a while without moving, listening to the ambient sound of the facility around him. All the mechanical breathing of a building. He knew the way he knew his own hands. He was in trouble. He knew it the way you know things you don't want to know. Not dramatically, not suddenly, just a slow, clear, unavoidable knowing that settled into the center of him like a stone dropping through still water. He was in serious trouble. He tried pulling back. Not obviously, he wasn't going to create a workplace situation out of what was entirely his own internal problem. He was professional. He was always professional. But he found reasons to send Marcus to meetings where his own presence wasn't strictly required. He kept his responses to her emails focused and brief. He stopped leaving his office door open in the afternoons. It worked for about 10 days. Then Sophie's birthday happened. He hadn't told anyone at work about it. He didn't bring his personal life into the building, never had. But somehow, on the morning of Sophie's birthday, there was a card in his maintenance office mailbox. Just a card. White envelope with his name on it in handwriting he didn't recognize at first. Inside, in that same handwriting, "Happy birthday to Sophie. I hope she has a wonderful day." Oh. He stood in the mailroom holding the card for a long time. I didn't know how she knew. He didn't know whether to be touched or unsettled or both. He stood there long enough that the third-shift electrician coming off duty gave him a concerned look on the way past. He put the card in his shirt pocket and went back to work. That afternoon he called Sophie after school and sang the birthday song badly on purpose, the way he always did. And she laughed the way she always did. And when she said, "Daddy, I love you," with her whole 9-year-old heart, he felt it in a way that simultaneously grounded him and broke him open. He typed a message to Olivia that evening, stared at it for 3 minutes, and then sent it. She had a great day. Thank you for remembering. The response came 11 minutes later. She deserves great days. So do you. He read it twice. Put his phone face down on the nightstand. Lay in the dark for a while. So do you. 3 words. He couldn't figure out why they hit him as hard as they did. Maybe because nobody had said anything like that to him in years. Not because people were unkind. People were fine, people were decent. But because he had made himself so thoroughly self-sufficient that nobody had felt the need. He had filled every gap before anyone could notice it existed. He had become so good at not needing anything that people had stopped thinking to offer. And here was this woman, this billionaire CEO who had no reason to see him at all, quietly noticing the gaps he thought he'd hidden. It scared him. It also, in a way, he couldn't yet admit out loud, felt like water after a very long drought. The thing about rumors is that they start small. Daniel noticed the shift in the break room first, the way certain conversations stopped a beat too late when he walked in, the way eyes moved between him and the door. He was experienced enough with workplace dynamics to read the temperature of a room, and the temperature had changed. He found out what was being said from Marcus, who told him straight, because that was the kind of person Marcus was. "People are talking about you and Sterling," Marcus said. They were in the equipment bay, and Marcus had the particular look of a man who wished he didn't have to say the thing he was saying. "Nothing specific. Just that she comes down here too much. That you got called into the site review personally. That things are happening outside normal channels." Daniel continued what he was doing with his hands for a moment before he responded. "What are people saying exactly? That you're playing it smart, getting close to the boss, that the schedule changes you got last month weren't merit-based." Daniel looked up. "What schedule changes?" Marcus was quiet. "Marcus, your Thursday afternoons were cleared for the past month," Marcus said carefully. "I thought you knew. Someone from her office contacted scheduling." Daniel set down what he was holding. I hadn't known. He had thought Thursday afternoons were just available because the project load had shifted. He hadn't asked because he had been too focused on the work itself to question the logistics. "I didn't request that," Daniel said. "I know. Does everyone think I did?" Marcus didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Daniel picked his tools back up. His jaw was tight. He worked in silence for 2 full minutes before Marcus said quietly, "I don't think you did anything wrong." "I know you don't." But people are going to think what they're going to think. I know that too. I knew exactly what it looked like from the outside. He knew how this story read to people who only saw the surface. The CEO who kept finding her way down to the maintenance department. The supervisor who kept getting called upstairs. The schedule accommodations. The card. The coffee. The food on the terrace. Taken separately, each thing was explainable. Taken together, they told a story. And the story was complicated by the fact that Daniel wasn't sure he could honestly say the story was wrong. He was just sure that whatever was happening, he hadn't engineered it. He hadn't positioned himself. He hadn't played anything smart. He had just been himself, invisible, hard-working, honest. And somehow that had drawn something toward him that he wasn't equipped to handle. I went home that evening and made dinner and helped Sophie with her homework and read her a chapter of the book they were working through together. And when she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table and looked at his hands for a long time. He needed to step back. For his own sake. For Sophie's sake. For the sake of the people on his team who worked hard and didn't deserve to have their manager's personal complications become a workplace conversation. The next morning, he sent a professionally worded email saying that due to current project load, he would need to pause the improvement proposal collaboration and that he was happy to continue contributing through written documentation. He stared at it for a long time. Then he hit send. Olivia's response came in 40 minutes. Just one line. "Can we talk in person?" He typed back. "I think the written process works better for both of us." She didn't respond after that. A week passed. He told himself he felt better. He told himself he had done the right thing. He threw himself into the work with the particular intensity of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts, and he was good enough at the work that it almost succeeded. Almost. On the 8th day, he was doing a walkthrough of the East Wing when he turned a corner and nearly ran into her again, which was starting to feel like a pattern the building itself was orchestrating. She stopped. He stopped. "I'm not following you," she said immediately. "I know. I have a sight walk with Garrett." "Okay." They stood there for a half-second that felt much longer. "Daniel," she said. "Can I just—" "Ms. Sterling. Olivia." Her voice was quiet, but it had an edge. Not anger. Something more like controlled hurt. "You've called me Olivia twice in private, and Ms. Sterling in front of people. I've noticed." He was quiet. "I got your email," she said. "I understood what it meant. I'm not going to push." She paused. "But I want to ask you one thing, and I want an honest answer." He waited. "Did I do something wrong, not professionally? I mean, did I cross a line with you somewhere? Did I make you uncomfortable?" He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "Then what happened? People are talking. Let them." It's easy to say that when the talking doesn't affect your position. Her chin came up slightly. "You think it doesn't affect mine?" "I think you have more runway than I do. That's not—" She stopped, collected herself. "I understand you're protecting yourself. I understand you're protecting your team. That's exactly the kind of person you are, and it's exactly why—" She stopped again. Something flickered across her face. "I'm not going to finish that sentence." "Why not?" She looked at him steadily. "Because you're not ready to hear it." He stood very still. "And that's okay," she said, quieter now. "I'm not going anywhere. I don't need you to be ready for anything. I just needed you to know that whatever you think this is from my side, it's not what you think it is." She walked past him toward the East Wing. He turned and watched her go. His heart was doing something loud and inconvenient in his chest. Marcus appeared, of course. Marcus appeared from around the next corner. "You need to stop materializing out of nowhere," Daniel said. "I work here," Marcus said. "What was that?" "Nothing." "That was definitely not nothing." "Marcus, I'm just—" "Go fix the pressure valve in the North Pool." "It's already fixed." "Then go check that it's fixed." Marcus went. Daniel stood in the corridor for another moment alone, looking at the direction she had walked. "It's not what you think it is." The problem he was beginning to understand was that he wasn't entirely sure what he thought it was. He had spent weeks telling himself it was nothing, or it was professional, or it was a complication he needed to manage. He had put labels on it that kept it at a safe distance. But labels only worked if you believed them. And standing in that corridor, he realized he had stopped believing his. He thought about Sophie asking him what he was thinking about, and him saying work, and her saying you were smiling. He thought about the birthday card in his shirt pocket that he had not thrown away. He thought about 3 words on a phone screen at 11 o'clock at night. So do you. He thought about being invisible for 6 years. He thought about how it had felt just once, just recently, to not be. He started walking, not back toward the maintenance office, not toward the North Pool to check on Marcus, toward the East Wing. He caught up with her just outside the entrance to the conference rooms before she reached Garrett and the rest of the site walk. She heard his footsteps and turned, and there was a careful neutrality on her face, the prepared expression of someone bracing for either nothing or something, not sure which. He stopped a few feet from her. "I don't think you did anything wrong," he said. She waited. "I think I got scared," he said. "And when I get scared, I close everything down. It's what I do." He paused. "It's been working for 6 years, so I didn't question it." Something shifted in her face. "What changed?" she said quietly. He looked at her. This woman who kept finding her way to the wrong corridor, to the maintenance office door, to the terrace in the evening, with a plate of food she didn't have to bring, and he told her the truth. "You kept showing up," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I tend to do that," she said softly. "When something matters." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. They stood there for another beat. Neither of them quite ready to move the whole careful architecture of everything they'd been pretending held its breath around them. Then Garrett's voice came from inside the conference room. "Olivia, we're ready when you are." She turned toward the door. "Daniel," she said without looking back. "Yeah. Thursday still works, if you want it to." I thought about Marcus. He thought about the break room. He thought about the rumors and the schedule changes and every sensible reason he had compiled for keeping a safe, professional, invisible distance. Then he thought about 6 years of 447 alarms and the way a single card in a mailbox had made him stand in the mailroom like a man who had forgotten how to move. "Thursday works," he said. She went inside. He stood in the corridor for a moment longer, and then he turned and walked back toward his department, and he didn't try to tell himself anything at all. Some things he was learning couldn't be filed under any category he already had. Some things required a new one. Thursday came back, and then the Thursday after that, and the one after that. They fell into something neither of them named, because naming it would have required agreeing on what it was, and they were both in their own ways too careful for that. But it was real. It had weight. It showed up every week like a kept promise, and it grew the way things grow when you stop trying to control them and just let them breathe. The improvement proposal became something larger than either of them had planned. What started as a staff retention document turned into a full operational review. Daniel's ground-level knowledge of the property meshing with Olivia's strategic instincts in a way that surprised them both. She would lay out a problem from 30,000 feet, and he would tell her exactly where the floor cracked at ground level. She would propose a solution, and he would tell her without softening it what would actually work and what looked good on paper but would fall apart in practice. She never got defensive when he pushed back. That was the thing that surprised him most. He had braced for it, had prepared himself for the particular fragility of someone who wasn't used to being told no. But Olivia leaned into disagreement like it was useful to her, which it was because she was smart enough to know that the people who told you what you wanted to hear were the most expensive people in any room. "You're doing it again," she said one Thursday afternoon, looking at him across the table. "Doing what?" "That thing where you have an opinion and you're deciding whether to say it or swallow it." He looked at her. "The vendor proposal for the East Wing renovation. The timeline is wrong." Garrett approved it. Garrett doesn't know that the East Wing shares a drainage system with the North Pool. If they start demolition in March, the way the proposal has it, they'll hit peak season with an open trench and a pool that can't be used. He slid this document back across the table. 6 weeks in September. That's the window. She looked at the document, then at him. Did you tell Garrett this? I sent a note to his assistant 3 weeks ago. And I'm telling you now. She held his gaze for a moment, then picked up her phone and sent a message that took about 9 seconds. The timeline is September, she said. I'll have the vendor revision on my desk by Friday. It'll push the budget cycle. I know. The alternative pushes the guest experience, which is more expensive. She set her phone down. Thank you for saying it. You don't have to keep thanking me, and you don't have to keep being surprised that I listen. She tilted her head slightly. We've been doing this for 2 months. Have I once ignored something you told me was wrong? He thought about it honestly. No. Then maybe update your expectations. He almost smiled. She saw it. She always saw it. He was learning, and something in her own face softened in response the way it did when she caught him being something other than careful. Sophie's school play is next week, she said, and the shift in subject was smooth enough that it took him a half-second to track it. You mentioned it last Thursday. You remembered that? I remember most things you say. She said it simply without making it into something. Is she nervous? She's playing a tree. Olivia blinked. A tree. She insisted on it. There were bigger parts available. She wanted the tree. He paused. She said trees are the most important part of any forest, and everybody ignores them. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed, the real one, not the polished professional version, the one that started somewhere in her chest and arrived completely unguarded, and Daniel felt it land somewhere in the center of him, like a bell being struck. She sounds like someone I'd like to know, Olivia said. He looked at her. Something in his chest moved in a direction he wasn't ready to examine. Maybe someday, he said. She didn't push it. She just nodded and looked back at the documents, and he went back to the drainage data, and they kept working. Maybe someday, he had said. He hadn't meant to say it. But once it was out, he found he didn't want to take it back. The Thursday sessions weren't the only thing that changed. Olivia started appearing in places she had no official reason to be, not obviously, not in any way that looked like pursuit, but consistently enough that Daniel stopped being surprised and started simply noticing. She would come through the maintenance corridor on the way from somewhere to somewhere else. She would stop by the equipment bay when his team was working on a project that she'd apparently found interesting based on the weekly reports she was reading more closely than anyone expected. She asked questions. Real questions, not the performative interest of a manager doing walkthroughs. She wanted to understand how things worked, and she remembered what she was told. That was the part Daniel couldn't get over. In his experience, people with authority listened to operational staff. The way people listened to weather reports. They heard the information, nodded appropriately, and then went ahead and made the plans they had already made. But Olivia came back to things. She referenced conversations from 2 weeks ago. She connected details across different conversations in ways that made it clear she had actually been present, actually taking it in. It made him trust her, which was dangerous. Because trust for Daniel was not a door he opened easily, and once opened, he didn't know how to close it part way. Marcus watched all of this with the careful, quiet attention of a man keeping his own counsel. "You're happy," Marcus said one morning in the flat, observational tone of someone reporting a weather pattern. "I'm the same as I always am," Daniel said. "No." Marcus handed him a work order. "You're different. You still work the same. You still run the same tight ship, but you're different underneath it." He paused. "It's good. I'm just saying." Daniel took the work order. "Focus on the north building," he said. "Focusing," Marcus said, and walked away, and Daniel stood with the work order in his hand and didn't argue because there was nothing to argue with. He was different. He didn't know what to do with that yet, but he was. Richard Hayes arrived on a Tuesday. Daniel didn't know who he was at first. He knew there was a visitor in the executive wing, one of the overnight guests, apparently using the property for private meetings, while the resort's conference center was between events. He filed it in the same mental category as every other executive visitor and didn't think about it further. He found out who Richard Hayes was from the worst possible source in the worst possible way. He was cutting through the east corridor on his way to the drainage inspection when he heard the voices from the small meeting room. The door not quite closed, the conversation carrying clearly into the empty hallway. He would have kept walking. He almost did. Then he heard his own name. Walker, Daniel Walker, the maintenance supervisor. Richard Hayes's voice was the kind of voice that took up space without permission, assured, slightly bored, accustomed to being the most important person in any room. That's who we're talking about. A pause, and then a second voice, Gerald Olivia's CFO, who Daniel had met twice and found efficient but nervous. Richard, I don't think this is... She personally requested he be included in the site review. She's been down in his department more times in the past 2 months than she's been in the legal division. She cleared his schedule. A short pause. Gerald, I need you to understand what this looks like. It looks like she values operational input. It looks like she's lost perspective. Hayes's voice sharpened slightly. I know Olivia. I know how she gets when she thinks she's found someone genuine. She romanticizes it. She always has. And when she romanticizes something, she stops being strategic about it. That's not fair. I'm not interested in fair. I'm interested in the company. Another pause. What does this man actually bring to the table, beyond keeping the lights on? Because from where I'm standing, Olivia is giving preferential treatment to an employee who has exactly zero business being in her orbit, and the board is going to notice. Daniel stood in the corridor and felt something cold move through him. He kept walking. He did the drainage inspection. He filed the report. He supervised the afternoon shift transition. He did all of it on the outside, while something on the inside stayed very quiet and very still. The way it did when he was processing something he wasn't ready to process yet. That evening, he put Sophie to bed and sat at the kitchen table with his hands flat on the surface and made himself think clearly. What Hayes had said was not nothing. The board observation, that was a real thing. Olivia's position at the company had always been strong, but strong positions had conditions, and one of those conditions was that the people around her believed her judgment was sound. If a former fiancé and Daniel had done enough math from the tone of that conversation to understand what Hayes was to her, was raising flags about her behavior to her CFO, that was not a small problem. And the schedule accommodations. Daniel had confronted Olivia about those after Marcus told him, but her answer had been brief and practical. She said she had cleared the time because the project needed it, and he had accepted that because he wanted to, not because it fully answered the question. Hayes was right that it looked like preferential treatment. And looking like preferential treatment was the same as being it in certain rooms. I wasn't naive about what that meant for his team. If the perception was that the maintenance supervisor had a personal relationship with the CEO, every decision that went in his department's favor, budget scheduling equipment allocation, became suspect. It didn't matter that he had never asked for any of it. It didn't matter that his team's performance metrics were the strongest in the property. What mattered was the story, and the story was currently being written by people who didn't know what was actually in his maintenance office on Thursday afternoons, and wouldn't believe him if he told them. I went to bed knowing what he needed to do. He lay awake for a long time anyway. He asked to see her the next morning. Formally through her assistant scheduled time, her office. Not the maintenance office, not a corridor, not Thursday. Her office. He sat across from her desk, and he looked at her directly, and he said, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. She folded her hands on the desk. All right. The schedule accommodations. The site review invitation. The way you've structured the proposal collaboration. He paused. Was any of that about the work, or was it about something else? She held his gaze without flinching. It was about both. He nodded slowly. That's what I thought. I'm not going to apologize for it, she said. The work benefited. The proposal is better because of those Thursday sessions than it would have been without them. That's true, and you know it's true. That's not the whole question. I know it's not. She was quiet for a moment. What did you hear? He looked at her. What? Something happened. Yesterday or the day before. Something specific. She read him the way she always read him, with that focused, unhurried attention. What did you hear? He told her about the corridor. He didn't soften it. He gave her Hayes's words as close to verbatim as he could. She listened without interrupting. When he was done, her face was composed, but her hands, still folded on the desk, were too still. The stillness of controlled reaction, not natural ease. "Richard," she said. Not a question, just the name, quiet and weighted. "Who is he?" Daniel said. "Former fiancé." She said it cleanly, without the careful hedging people usually used around that word. "We were together for 3 years, ended 18 months ago. He's on the periphery of the company's investor network, which is the only reason Gerald takes his calls. He thinks you've lost perspective. I heard you the first time." She looked at the desk surface for a moment, then up at him. "Do you think I've lost perspective?" "I think," Daniel said carefully, "that you did things outside normal channels that I didn't know about, and that those things put me in a position I didn't have full information about." "That's fair." "It's not about fair. It's about my team." He leaned forward slightly. "If the perception is that I'm getting special treatment, every one of my people gets caught in that shadow. They work hard. They don't deserve to have their performance questioned because of something they have nothing to do with." She was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was lower. "You're right. I should have been more transparent with you about the accommodations. I made a unilateral decision, and it wasn't mine to make alone." She met his eyes. "I'm sorry." "Why did you do it?" She held his gaze. "Because I wanted more time," she said simply. He sat with that. "With the project," he said. "Yes." A pause. "And with you." The office was very quiet. "Olivia, I'm not asking you for anything," she said, and her voice was steady, but he could hear what it cost her to make it steady. "I'm not creating an expectation. You asked me for an honest answer. That's the honest answer. I arranged those Thursdays partly because the project needed them, and partly because I am a 30-year-old woman who has spent 3 years making decisions alone, and the hours I spent in that conference room with you were the first time in a very long time that I felt like I was—" She stopped. "What?" he said quietly. "Myself," she said. "Just myself." He looked at her. This woman who ran 23 properties and sat in boardrooms and was on the cover of business magazines. This woman who kept finding her way to the wrong corridor and bringing food to terraces and remembering the name of his daughter. And he felt something in him give way. Not collapse, not break. Just give the way something gives when it's been under pressure for a long time and someone finally takes the weight off. "I need you to understand something," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not pulling back again." He paused. "But I need us to do this right. Whatever this is. I have a daughter who is watching me. I have a team that trusts me. I can't have the story of this be something that damages either of those things." "I understand. And I need to know that when I push back on something in that conference room, it's because I'm right, not because you're protecting me." "It's always been because you're right," she said firmly. "That has never been the other thing." He believed her. He believed her because he had watched her override Garrett and 2 other VPs on his operational calls, and her rationale had always been sound and specific and unconnected to anything personal. The work had always been the work. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. He stood up. "Thursday," he said. Something in her face eased. "Thursday." I went back to his department, and he worked through the afternoon with a focused clarity that Marcus clocked immediately, but for once did not comment on. The thing about Richard Hayes was that he didn't stop. Daniel had understood from the sound of that corridor conversation that Hayes was the kind of man who operated on a long timeline patient in the way that entitled people could be patient when they believed the outcome was already assured. He wasn't going to make one complaint and walk away. He was going to build something layer by layer until the thing he was building was too heavy to ignore. Daniel saw the first layer 4 days later. He was called into a meeting with the resort's HR director, a formal check-in. It was described as routine for senior staff. Daniel had had these before. They were administrative brief and generated by a calendar algorithm rather than any specific trigger. This one was different. The HR director, A careful woman named Patricia, who Daniel had always found professional and straight-dealing, had a particular expression when he came in. The expression of someone who had been handed a situation she hadn't requested and was managing it as correctly as she could. "I want to be upfront with you," Patricia said. "This meeting was requested by a member of the executive stakeholder group. It's not routine." He sat down. "What's the concern?" "There have been questions raised about the circumstances of your recent project involvement at the executive level." She looked at him steadily. "Specifically whether proper protocols were followed in terms of interdepartmental collaboration, and whether there are any personal relationship disclosures that should be on record." He kept his face even. "I've been working on an improvement proposal at Ms. Sterling's request. All sessions were in a conference room, door open, with documentation generated." "I understand. This is a formality more than an investigation." She paused. "But Daniel, off the record, someone is pushing this, and I think you should know that." "I know," he said. She looked at him carefully. "Is there anything you want to put on record? Nothing beyond what's already documented in the project files." He paused. "Which are thorough." "All right." She made a note. "That's all I needed." He walked out. He went directly to his office and sat down and looked at his hands and let himself feel for exactly 2 minutes the particular sick anger of a man being maneuvered in a game he didn't choose to play. The anger of someone whose work and whose integrity were being used as instruments in someone else's story. Then he picked up his phone. He didn't call Olivia. He thought about it and didn't, because calling her would look like exactly what Hayes wanted it to look like. The maintenance supervisor, running to the CEO when things got difficult. The proof of the inappropriate relationship Hayes was trying to establish on paper. Instead, he called his union representative, who he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, and had a 10-minute conversation about documentation and protocol. And when he hung up, he felt marginally more in control of at least one thing. Then he wrote a detailed summary of every interaction with Olivia since the retreat dates, subjects, who else was present. Outcomes generated, and saved it in a personal file that lived on his personal laptop and not on any company server. Not because he was hiding it. Because he wanted it to exist somewhere that couldn't be selectively accessed. He had built redundancy systems his entire career. Some things required the same approach. Hayes moved to the second layer on a Friday afternoon. The executive team was gathered for a briefing on the quarterly property performance meeting. Daniel was not part of, and had no reason to be near. He heard about what happened in it from Gerald, of all people, who appeared in the maintenance office at the end of the day, with the look of a man whose conscience was giving him trouble. "I owe you a heads up," Gerald said. He was clearly uncomfortable and pushing through it. In the quarterly briefing today, Richard raised concerns about the operational budget allocations for this property. He suggested there were anomalies that warranted review, specifically around the maintenance department's resource allocation over the past quarter. Daniel looked at him. "Are there anomalies?" "No," Gerald said it flatly. "Your department's numbers are clean, and the performance metrics support every allocation. But he's put it on record as a board-level concern, which means it has to go through a formal review process, regardless of what the numbers show." "How long does that take?" 6 to 8 weeks. Daniel looked at the wall for a moment. "And in those 6 to 8 weeks," he said, "is there anything that flags on my record?" "Not unless the review finds something." "It won't." "I know." Gerald paused. "Daniel, I want you to understand, I'm not Richard's person. I work for this company, and I work for Olivia. But Richard has access to people on the investor side that I can't simply dismiss, and when he raises something formally, I have to follow the process." He paused again. "Olivia doesn't know he did this today. She wasn't in the meeting. She had a call with the San Francisco office. She'll be briefed Monday." "Thank you for telling me." Gerald nodded and left. Daniel sat in the empty maintenance office as the building settled into its late afternoon quiet around him, and he thought about 6 weeks of a formal review hanging over his department. He thought about Marcus and the electricians and the HVAC technicians and the groundskeeping supervisors. All of them people who came to work and did their jobs without complication, suddenly existing under a shadow that had nothing to do with anything they had done. He thought about Hayes's voice in the corridor. What does this man actually bring to the table beyond keeping the lights on? He thought about Olivia saying, "I arranged those Thursdays, partly because the project needed them, and partly because I am a woman who felt like herself for the first time in a long time." And he thought about what it meant that a man with no actual stake in the work, no understanding of the operation, no investment in any outcome beyond his own position, could weaponize all of that with a few careful words in the right rooms. He was angry. He was genuinely deeply angry in a way that he rarely allowed himself to be, because anger was not a tool he trusted himself with. He kept it clean and contained and examined it honestly the way he did with everything. And then he made a decision. He was going to talk to Richard Hayes directly. He found out. Hayes was staying in the executive guest suite through the overnight reservation log, which he had access to as part of his facility's management responsibilities. He sent a message through the formal guest communication system, brief professional requesting a meeting at the guest's convenience. Business related. No further context. Hayes responded in 2 hours. 8 o'clock Saturday morning. The resort terrace. Daniel was there at 7:55. Hayes arrived at 8, exactly in the way of a man who was never late and never early, and considered both conditions a form of communication. He was tall, well-maintained, with the practiced ease of someone who had never in his adult life entered a room without believing he owned it. He sat across from Daniel and ordered coffee from the server, and looked at Daniel with the particular expression of a man who had already written the outcome and was curious to see how the other party would perform. "Walker," he said. "Hayes," Daniel said. "I respect the directness." Hayes leaned back. "What can I do for you?" "You can tell me what you want," Daniel said. "Not what you told Gerald, not what you put in front of the board, what you actually want." Hayes looked at him for a moment, with something that wasn't quite respect, but was adjacent to it, the acknowledgement of someone who had expected a less direct conversation and was recalibrating. "What I want," Hayes said, "is for Olivia to make decisions that are in the best interest of her company." "You mean in your interest?" "I mean in the company's interest. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." "You triggered a 6-week audit of my department," Daniel said. "My department's numbers are clean. You know that, or you wouldn't have had to manufacture a board concern to generate the review. So that's not about the company's interest. What is it about?" Hayes looked at him. "You're smarter than you look," he said. "Not a compliment, an adjustment." "My numbers are clean," Daniel said again. "My team is clean. The improvement proposal I've been working on is going to save this property close to $200,000 in avoidable emergency costs over the next 3 years. He paused. "What you're doing isn't about any of that. So tell me what it's about." Hayes was quiet for a moment. He picked up his coffee when it arrived. Set it down. "Olivia makes decisions from her gut," Hayes said finally. "It's one of the things that makes her exceptional, and one of the things that makes her dangerous. When she believes in something, she goes all in. She doesn't half measure." He looked at Daniel. "I know her. I know how she is when she's personally invested in something, and I know that when she's personally invested in something, she stops asking whether the something is actually good for her, and you think you know what's good for her. I think I have 17 years of business relationships in this industry and a perspective she doesn't currently have access to." Hayes's voice didn't rise. It never rose. "I am not your enemy, Walker. I'm a man trying to protect someone who matters to me from a mistake she'll regret. By destroying my department's credibility. By creating a process that generates accountability. That's a careful way to say what you're doing. It's an accurate way." Hayes looked at him steadily. "Walk away from whatever this is with Olivia. I'm not telling you this to threaten you. I'm telling you this because I'm the only person in this situation who's being honest with you about the stakes. You don't know what it looks like when Olivia's personal decisions become public. You don't know what this industry does to people who get caught in the middle of that. And you do. I've watched it happen." Daniel looked at him. He looked at this man who had 3 years of intimate knowledge of Olivia Sterling, who had clearly loved her in whatever way he was capable of loving things, who genuinely believed he was performing an act of protection, and who had no understanding whatsoever of the distinction between protecting someone and controlling them. "Let me ask you something," Daniel said. Hayes waited. "When you were with her, did she ever tell you that she felt like herself?" A pause. "What? Like she could just be herself, without performing, without managing. Did she ever tell you that?" Hayes looked at him with a new and very particular kind of attention. The attention of a man who has been handed an answer he didn't know he was missing and doesn't know what to do with it. He didn't respond. Daniel stood up. "Withdraw the audit," he said. "My team doesn't deserve what you put on them. And if I don't, then the audit runs, finds nothing, closes, and you've spent 6 weeks proving you had nothing." He picked up his jacket. "But you already know that, which means the audit was never about finding something. It was about making noise." He looked at Hayes directly. "I'm not going to be noise you can control. And I'm not going to walk away from something that matters to me because it's inconvenient for you." He walked out of the terrace and down the steps and across the grounds in the sharp morning air, and he felt his heart beating hard in his chest. Not from anger anymore, but from something different. Something that sat in the center of him and was steady and clear and certain in a way he hadn't felt in a very long time. He was halfway back to the maintenance facility when his phone buzzed. A message from Olivia. "Gerald briefed me this morning. I'm sorry you're dealing with this. And I want you to know whatever you decide about any of this, I will handle Richard. You don't have to." He stopped walking. He stood on the path between the East Garden and the maintenance complex and typed back, "I already did." 3 dots. Then, "What I talked to him this morning." A longer pause. "Are you serious? He should withdraw the audit. I made the case." Another pause. Then, "Daniel Walker, you absolute." The message cut off like she'd stopped herself. Then, "Are you okay?" He almost smiled. "I'm fine," he typed. "Come find me when you have a minute." He put his phone in his pocket and kept walking, and the morning was loud with birds and the distant sound of the ocean. And somewhere in the space between where he'd started and where he was now, something had shifted so fundamentally that he could feel it in his feet. Hayes had wanted him scared. He wasn't scared. He was the man who fixed broken things. He had spent 6 years doing it quietly, invisibly, without asking for recognition or reward. But there was a difference between choosing invisible and being made invisible. And standing on that path with the morning sun on his back, Daniel Walker finally fully understood the difference. He was done choosing it for the wrong reasons. Olivia found him 40 minutes later. Not in the maintenance office. Not in the equipment bay. She found him exactly where he was, crouched under the north pool pump, housing running a diagnostic on the pressure system that Marcus had flagged 2 days ago and that Daniel had been putting off because the week had been too full of other things. She crouched down next to him. He heard her heels on the concrete, registered the inappropriateness of expensive shoes near pool equipment, and did not say anything about it. "You talked to Richard," she said. "I did. Without telling me. You would have told me not to." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes, I would have." He finished what he was doing with the pressure gauge and sat back on his heels and looked at her. She was in work clothes, the kind of polished, put-together appearance she maintained as a kind of professional armor, but something around her eyes was different. She'd been carrying something heavy since Gerald's briefing, and she hadn't put it down yet. "What did he say?" she asked. "He said he was protecting you from a mistake." "Of course he did." Her voice was even, but he heard the edge under it. "What did you say?" "I asked him if you ever told him you felt like yourself when you were with him." She went very still. "And," she said quietly. He didn't answer. She looked at the pump housing, at the concrete, at some middle distance that wasn't either of those things. He watched her process it, watched the careful, composed exterior hold, while something underneath it moved. "I never did," she said finally. "Tell him that. I never said those words to him." "I know." She looked at him then. "How do you know?" "Because you said them to me," he said. "And I could tell it was the first time you'd said them to anyone." She held his gaze for a long moment. The pool equipment hummed. Somewhere on the property, a maintenance cart went past on the path above them, wheels on pavement. Daniel. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I told you that. I meant it. Richard isn't finished, she said. The audit runs clean and closes. My numbers are solid, Olivia. He's not going to find anything because there's nothing to find. That's not the point. The point is, he put it there. The board has it on record that questions were raised. Even a clean audit leaves a mark. Then it leaves a mark. He looked at her steadily. I've been doing this job for 6 years with nothing on my record. One politically motivated audit isn't going to change what my department actually is. The people who matter know the work. I care about what it cost you. I care that you're dealing with this because of me. I'm dealing with it because Richard Hayes is a man who doesn't know how to let something go that was never actually his. He paused. That's his problem, not yours. And not mine. She stared at him. You are... She stopped, shook her head slowly. Do you know how many people in my professional life, when facing what you're currently facing, would be in my office right now, demanding either protection or compensation? That's not what this is. I know it's not. That's what I'm saying. She looked at him with an expression he was starting to be able to read, the one she wore when something surprised her in a way she wasn't prepared for, when the world deviated from the pattern she'd built her expectations around. You went and faced him yourself, without asking me for anything, and then you texted me to come find you like it was a normal Tuesday. It is a normal Tuesday. Daniel. The pump pressure's been running high, he said, gesturing at the housing. I need to replace the valve before the weekend, or it's going to affect the filtration cycle. He looked at her. You want to hand me that wrench? She looked at the wrench lying on the concrete next to the toolbox. Then she picked it up and held it out. He took it. She watched him work for a moment. I'm going to make a structural change, she said. To how we're doing this, the collaboration, the project involvement. I should have done it sooner, and I didn't because I didn't want to, which was selfish. She paused. I'm going to move the improvement proposal into the formal interdepartmental structure. It'll go through the facilities director's office officially. You'll still be the primary operational contributor, but the collaboration will be documented through proper channels, and there won't be any question about access or protocol. He kept working. That makes sense, he said. It means we won't have Thursdays the same way. I know. I'm not doing it to pull back. I'm doing it because you told me you needed things to be right, and this is what right looks like. She paused. I should have structured it this way from the beginning. He looked up at her. Why didn't you? She held his gaze. Because structure would have made it professional, she said. And I didn't want it to only be professional. He looked at her for a long moment. The honesty of it. The clean, unhedged honesty, delivered without drama or expectation, did something to him that he didn't have a word for. Okay, he said. Okay. Okay, make the structural change. You're right that it should have been there from the start. He paused. And Olivia. Yeah. It was never only professional, even when it was structured. He held her gaze. You know that. Something moved across her face, slow, like light moving across water. Yeah, she said quietly. I know that. He went back to the valve. She sat on the concrete next to the pump housing in her expensive clothes and didn't make any move to leave, and he didn't tell her to. They stayed like that for a while, him working her present, the ordinary sounds of the property around them, and it was the most natural thing that had happened in weeks. The audit notice came formally on Thursday morning. 6 to 8 weeks, as Gerald had said. The review was being conducted by an external firm, standard protocol, when a board-level concern was raised, and Daniel's department would need to provide documentation going back 18 months. Budget allocations, labor hours, vendor contracts, equipment purchases, scheduling records. Daniel spent Thursday morning pulling the files. He had always kept meticulous records. Not because he anticipated needing them for anything like this, simply because meticulous records were how you ran an operation that nobody questioned. He had documentation for everything. Every purchase, justified every hour logged, every vendor contract, with 3 competitive quotes on file. The redundancy in his documentation matched the redundancy in his systems. Marcus helped him organize the files. "How are you this calm?" Marcus said somewhere around hour 2. "I'm not calm," Daniel said. "I'm busy. There's a difference. You're not showing it." "I'm working. That's what showing it looks like for me." He pulled another folder. "Are the vendor contracts from Q2 in the physical files, or did Chen digitize them?" "Digital. I'll pull them." They worked in silence for a while. Then Marcus said, without looking up from his screen, "You know the team is behind you." Daniel looked up. "I didn't say anything to them," Daniel said. "You didn't have to. People talk. People also pay attention." Marcus looked at him. "Everybody in this department knows you've never once used your position to get anything for yourself. They know what this audit is, and they know whose hands it came from." He paused. "I just wanted you to know that they know." Daniel looked back down at the files. "Tell them to keep their heads down and do their work," he said. "That's the best thing anyone can do right now." "Already told them." "Good." A beat of silence. "Thank you, Marcus," Daniel said. Marcus made a noise that wasn't quite a response and went back to the digital files, and Daniel kept pulling folders, and the work continued, the way work always continued, steady, necessary forward. The formal confrontation happened on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks into the audit, and it happened in the main hallway of the executive wing, which Daniel had specifically been trying to avoid because executive hallways were not his territory, and he had no desire to be seen in one more than professionally necessary. He was there because Olivia had called him up to review a revised section of the proposal, now formally routed through the facilities director, as she had said, but still requiring his operational input. He had done what he came to do. He was leaving. He turned the corner and walked directly into the ambush. Richard Hayes was standing in the hallway with 2 men. Daniel didn't recognize the investor network people he gathered from Context and Garrett, who had the expression of someone who had known this was going to happen and hadn't found a way to stop it. Hayes saw him. Something in his face shifted a calculation quick and decided. "Walker," Hayes said loud enough that it carried. "Just the man." Daniel stopped. He looked at Hayes, at the 2 men, at Garrett, who gave him a microscopic expression that said, "I'm sorry, and also I can't help you right now." "Hayes," Daniel said. "We were just discussing the audit," Hayes said pleasantly. "I understand the documentation review is going well." "It is. Good. Transparency is good for everyone." Hayes took a step forward. "I want to make sure we're all clear on something. The concern I raised wasn't personal. It was about process. When a maintenance supervisor has the kind of direct access to the CEO that you've had, it creates structural questions. I'm sure you understand." "I understand what you're doing," Daniel said. Hayes's eyes didn't change. "I'm not doing anything, Walker. I'm asking reasonable questions about corporate governance. You triggered an audit you knew would find nothing using a board mechanism that exists for legitimate concerns to manufacture a paper trail that makes a personal situation look like a professional one." Daniel kept his voice level. "That's what you're doing." One of the 2 investors shifted. Garrett was very still. Hayes's expression didn't waver. "That's a serious accusation." "It's an accurate one. You realize," Hayes said, his voice dropping slightly, "that this kind of confrontational posture from someone in your position, directed at a stakeholder, at my level, is exactly the kind of thing that gets documented. Exactly the kind of thing that makes people question your judgment." "People can question whatever they want," Daniel said. "My records speak for themselves. 18 months of them fully documented, currently being reviewed by an external firm that's going to spend 6 weeks finding nothing." He paused. "When they're done, the record will show a clean department and a board concern that didn't hold up. That's the paper trail you're actually creating." Hayes looked at him for a long moment. Then he did something Daniel didn't expect. He smiled. Not the practiced social smile. Something older and quieter and more real. "She didn't pick wrong," Hayes said low enough that only Daniel heard it. Daniel held his gaze. "No," Hayes said almost to himself. "She really didn't." He turned and said something to the two investors, and the group moved down the hallway, and Garrett exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath underwater. That was, Garrett started. I need to get back to my department, Daniel said. Right. Yes. Garrett paused. For what it's worth, the external firm lead told me off the record yesterday that the documentation your team provided is some of the cleanest they've seen in a property audit. Just for what it's worth. Daniel nodded. He walked back to the maintenance wing. He sat in his office for exactly 5 minutes alone, letting the adrenaline settle. Then he picked up the pressure gauge report from the North Pool, put it in his outbox, and moved on to the next thing. Chete. Olivia heard about the hallway within 2 hours. He knew she would. The executive wing had its own ecosystem, and information moved through it, the way information moved through any small enclosed community, fast and slightly distorted, and inevitable. She texted him. Are you okay? He typed back. Yes. I'm sorry. I should have been there. It's fine. It went fine. A pause. Then, can I call you tonight? He looked at that for a moment. Not a Thursday session. Not a professional consultation. Just can I call you? He typed, yes. She called at 9. Sophie was in bed. He was at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold, and he answered on the second ring. Hey, she said. Hey. Tell me what happened. He told her. All of it, including the end, the part where Hayes had said she didn't pick wrong in a voice that sounded like something let go. She was quiet for a long moment when he finished. He said that, she said softly. He said it. A pause. Richard is complicated. He's not a bad man. He's just a man who was very certain about something and got it wrong, and he doesn't have a good system for being wrong. Another pause. I think he genuinely thought he was helping. I also think he genuinely knows now that he wasn't. He was trying to scare me away. I know. It didn't work. I know that too. Her voice was quieter. Daniel, I need to say something to you, and I need you to actually hear it. I'm listening. What you've dealt with in the past 3 weeks, the rumors, the HR meeting, the audit, the hallway today, none of that was supposed to be part of whatever this is between us. None of it was fair to you. And I know you keep saying it's fine, and you keep handling it, and you keep showing up. She paused. I just want you to know that I see it. I see what it's cost you, and I'm grateful in a way I don't quite have words for. He sat with that for a moment. Can I say something back? He said. Yes. 6 years ago, I stopped believing that anything new was going to happen to me. Not in a dark way. I wasn't suffering. I had Sophie. I had work I was good at. I had a life that functioned. He paused, choosing the words carefully. But I had stopped expecting anything. I had stopped looking for anything. I had made my peace with small and safe and known. He paused. And then you walked into a maintenance corridor because you took a wrong turn, and you asked me for directions, like I was a person, and something in me, just a small thing, somewhere in the back woke up. She didn't say anything. That's what this has cost me, he said. Waking up. That's the whole price. A very long silence. When she spoke, her voice was careful and quiet in the way of someone making sure they say the right thing. That's not a cost, she said. That's just what it feels like to be alive again. He looked at his cold coffee. Yeah, he said. I'm starting to figure that out. They talked for another hour. Not about the audit, or Hayes, or the proposal, or anything that had a professional category. She told him about her father, the real version, not the version she gave in business contexts. The complicated, loving, disappointed version of a man who had handed his daughter a company she hadn't asked for, and then retreated into an illness that made it impossible to ask if that was what she had wanted. Daniel told her about the year after his wife died, the specific mechanics of grief when you're also a single parent, the way it doesn't get to be about you, because someone small needs breakfast and a permission slip, and someone to be there at 500 a.m. in cartoon socks. They talked like two people who had been storing things for a long time and had finally found a container safe enough to put them in. At 10:15 she said, I should let you sleep. Probably. Daniel. Yeah. Thank you. For tonight. A pause. For all of it. Stop thanking me, he said, and there was warmth in it now, not deflection. I can't help it. He could hear the smile in her voice. Get some sleep. You too. He set the phone down on the table and sat in the quiet kitchen and felt the particular quality of the silence around him. Not the old silence, the one that had texture of absence in it, but something different. Something that felt for the first time in a very long time like possibility. 3 weeks later, Olivia made an announcement to the full management team. Not about the relationship. There was nothing official to announce, nothing that required a formal declaration. What she announced was a structural realignment of the operational consultation process. The improvement proposal was being elevated to a company-wide initiative to be piloted first at the Sterling Coast property and then rolled out across all 23 locations if the results warranted. The process model, the ground-level operational knowledge integrated with strategic planning, would be formalized as a standard methodology. Daniel would lead the operational development team for the pilot. It was a promotion in everything but title, because the title structure didn't have a category for what he was doing yet. Garrett pulled him aside after the announcement. For what it's worth, Garrett said, and he had the look of a man who had revised his opinion of something and was being adult about it. The proposal is genuinely good. The East Wing timeline alone is going to save this property more than the methodology cost to develop. He paused. And the external audit closed yesterday. Clean across the board. The board-level notation has been formally removed from the record. I heard, Daniel said. Hayes withdrew from the investor advisory call last week, Garrett added, and there was nothing in his voice that said it was a triumph, just information. He's still connected to the network, but he stepped back from this property specifically. Daniel nodded. He wasn't going to celebrate that. Whatever Hayes had been working through, he had worked through it his own way, and Daniel didn't have room in him for scoring points against a man who in the end had said she didn't pick wrong. Thank you for telling me, Daniel said. Sure. Garrett paused. Walker, I want to be direct about something. Go ahead. I wasn't on your side at the beginning of this. I didn't think you belonged in the rooms you were getting put in, and I thought Sterling was letting personal factors affect professional judgment. He met Daniel's eyes. I was wrong about the professional judgment. The work is the work, and the work is excellent. A beat. I'm still working on the rest of my opinions, but I wanted you to know I was wrong about the part I was most wrong about. Daniel looked at him. I appreciate that, he said, and meant it. He told Sophie about Olivia on a Sunday morning. He had thought about how to do it for a while. He had thought about timing, about framing, about what a 9-year-old needed to understand and what could wait. He had thought about it with the same careful, thorough attention he gave to everything that mattered. Then Sophie came in while he was making pancakes and said without preamble, "Is she your girlfriend?" He turned around. "Who?" he said. Sophie gave him the look that said she was 9, not 3. "The lady from work, the one who sent me the birthday card." She climbed onto her bar stool. "Marcus told Mrs. Alvarez that you were different, and Mrs. Alvarez told me." "Marcus," Daniel said to the ceiling. "Is she?" He turned back to the pancakes. "She's someone I care about," he said carefully. "It's still early. It's something we're figuring out." "Do you like her?" "Yes." "Does she like you?" "I think so." Sophie considered this with the serious, systematic approach she applied to most things. What does she look like?" "Olivia. If that's her name." "She has dark hair. She's about this tall." He indicated a height. "She laughs when you say something true." Sophie thought about that. "That's a good way to laugh." "Yeah," he agreed. "It is." "Is she nice to you?" He turned and looked at his daughter. There was a thing that happened, sometimes a moment when he saw her mother in her so clearly that it took his breath, and this was one of those moments. Not in the face exactly, but in the directness. The way Claire had always asked the question that mattered without circling around it. "Is she nice to you?" Not is she rich, is she pretty, is she important, just that. "Yes," he said. "She's very nice to me." Sophie nodded, satisfied. "Okay." She watched him flip a pancake. Can I meet her sometime? Someday, he said. And this time when he said it, it didn't feel like deflection. It felt like a plan. The Thursday after that conversation, Olivia appeared at the maintenance office door. Not for the project. Not for a professional consultation. She had a coffee in each hand, and she held one out and said, "I know we restructured the format. I know it's now all going through proper channels. I just—" She paused. "I missed the door." He looked at her. "Missed the door," he said. "Standing in your doorway, it's—" She made a slight gesture that was uncharacteristically unpolished. "I don't know. It's the most normal I feel all week." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled his chair out from behind the desk, turned it to face the room and said, "Then stand in the door." She laughed. The real one. She leaned against the doorframe with her coffee, and he sat in his chair with his, and they talked about nothing important. For 20 minutes, Sophie's tree performance, which had apparently been deeply moving to at least 3 parents. The North Pool pressure valve which was holding. A restaurant Olivia had found in the city that she thought he would like. It was the most uncomplicated 20 minutes he'd had in months. Marcus walked past the open door at minute 11, saw the situation, and kept walking with the focused, neutral expression of a man who had evolved beyond comment. When Olivia left, she paused in the doorway. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah, I know this is still—" She paused, finding the words. "I know there are still things we're navigating. The professional piece, the public piece, the whatever. Richard left in his wake piece." She looked at him. "I just want you to know that I'm not navigating any of it because I feel like I have to. I'm navigating it because it's worth it." She paused. "You're worth it." He looked at her. He had spent 6 years being the man who was worth nothing beyond his usefulness. The invisible man. The one who kept the lights on. The one who didn't belong in rooms that had windows. He had believed it. Not bitterly, he hadn't been bitter about it. But he had believed it the way you believe things that have never been seriously challenged. The way you believe a door is locked if you've never tried the handle. "Olivia," he said. "Yeah." Sophie asked if she could meet you. Her whole face changed. Not dramatically. Not a performance. Just opened the way a door opens quietly and completely when someone finally uses the handle. "Yeah," she said softly. "I said someday." "When someday?" He thought about it. About the backyard and the kitchen table, and the 9-year-old in cartoon socks who had her mother's eyes and her own particular kind of courage. "Give me 2 weeks," he said. She nodded. 2 weeks. She left. He turned back to his desk and picked up the work order on top of the pile and looked at it without reading it for a moment. And he thought about a 4:47 alarm and black coffee and the life he had built around making sure nothing needed him to be more than what he already was. He thought about a maintenance corridor and wrong turns and sunscreen on a beach. He thought about what it meant that the thing you weren't looking for was also, it turned out, the thing you needed most. He thought about doors, and how the whole difference between a locked door and an open one was nothing more than the decision to try the handle. He put the work order in the active pile. He picked up his pen. He got back to work. 2 weeks turned out to be exactly right, not because anything was fully resolved. By then the professional restructuring was still settling the property, was still adjusting to the new operational methodology, and the particular low-grade awareness of what people thought and said had not entirely disappeared, because it never entirely disappeared in places where people worked closely together. But 2 weeks was enough time for Daniel to feel sure that what he was doing was right. Not reckless, not reactive. Considered, decided, and right. He told Sophie on a Thursday evening. Not as a big announcement. He told her the way he told her most things, straightforwardly at the kitchen table while they were both doing something else. "Remember we talked about Olivia," he said. Sophie looked up from her homework. "The lady from work. She's coming for dinner Saturday." Sophie put her pencil down. This apparently warranted full attention. "Here to our house." "Yes." "Is she going to think our house is small?" Daniel looked at her. "Why would she think that?" Because Marcus said she's really rich. Marcus, Daniel said to the ceiling again for the second time in 2 weeks, talks too much. Is she? She has more money than us, yes. But is she going to think our house is small? I thought about that. He thought about Olivia sitting on the concrete next to a pool pump housing in her work clothes. About her standing in a maintenance office doorway with 2 coffees, like it was the most natural place she could be. About her saying it's the most normal I feel all week. No, he said. She won't. Sophie considered this and picked her pencil back up. What are you going to make? I was thinking the chicken. With the lemon. With the lemon. She nodded with the gravity of someone approving an important decision. That's the right one, she said. It's the best thing you make. He went back to his own papers. Daddy, Sophie said after a moment. Yeah. I'm glad she's coming. He looked up. She was already back to her homework pencil, moving across the page completely matter-of-fact about the thing she'd just said. The way she was matter-of-fact about most things, dropping truth into the air and letting it land without needing to watch it fall. His chest ached with how much he loved her. Me too, Bug, he said. Me too. Saturday arrived the way important days always arrive, looking deceptively like a regular day. The alarm at 4:47. The coffee. The morning. He drove Sophie to her friend Lily's house for the afternoon, and came back and cleaned the house with the particular thoroughness of a man who had been doing his own housekeeping for 6 years and knew where all the edges were that company wouldn't see, but he would know about. He started the chicken at 4 o'clock. Olivia arrived at 6. He heard her car in the driveway, not the company car, a different one quieter, and he wiped his hands on a dish towel and went to the door and opened it before she could knock. She was standing on his porch in jeans and a dark blue shirt, her hair down, no briefcase, no tablet, nothing that belonged to the professional version of herself. She had a bottle of wine in one hand and what appeared to be a box of cookies in the other. She looked at him. I didn't know what to bring, she said. So I brought both. You didn't have to bring anything. I know. I also bought flowers and then left them in the car because I thought flowers was too much and cookies were better. She paused. I've been overthinking this for approximately 48 hours. He looked at her, this woman who ran 23 properties and negotiated with boards and had never in any professional setting he had ever seen her in, appeared uncertain about a single thing standing on his front porch, overthinking cookies. Something in him turned over quietly. Come in, he said. She came in. She stood in the entryway of his house and looked around with the focused attention she gave to everything, and he watched her take it in the framed photos on the wall. Sophie's drawings on the refrigerator visible through the kitchen doorway, the slightly worn couch and the bookshelves, and the evidence everywhere of a life that was small and full and genuinely lived. It's warm, she said. It's a house. No. She looked at him. I mean it's warm. It feels like people live here. She paused. My house has good furniture and very little evidence that anyone actually exists inside it. That can change, he said. She looked at him. He gestured toward the kitchen. The chicken has about 30 minutes. You want to open the wine. She followed him into the kitchen, and the evening began. He got Sophie at 7:30. She came through the front door at a run saw. Olivia at the kitchen table and stopped so abruptly that her sneakers squeaked on the floor. She stood in the entryway and looked at Olivia with the direct assessing gaze of a child who had not yet learned to perform social ease. Olivia looked back at her with equal directness. You're Sophie, Olivia said. You're Olivia, Sophie said. Yes. You sent me the birthday card. I did. Sophie thought about this for a moment. How did you know it was my birthday? Your dad mentioned it, Olivia said. And I have a good memory for things that matter. Sophie considered her for another moment. Then she walked fully into the kitchen, climbed onto her bar stool, looked at the cookies on the counter and said, Did you bring those? I did. Can we have them for dessert? That's up to your dad. Sophie looked at Daniel with the expression of someone who already knew the answer. After dinner, Daniel said. Okay. Sophie looked back at Olivia. My dad says you're nice to him." Olivia glanced at Daniel. Something in her face was careful and warm and slightly undone. "I try to be." "He's nice to everyone," Sophie said. "But not everyone is nice back. So I like that you are." The kitchen was quiet for a moment. Olivia looked at Sophie for a long beat, and Daniel could see her taking it in this 9-year-old girl with her mother's eyes and her father's honesty, and whatever was happening in Olivia's face went too deep for him to fully read. "Me too," Olivia said quietly. "I like it too." Sophie nodded, as if that settled everything, picked up her glass of water, and turned to Daniel. "Can I watch something until dinner?" 30 minutes, he said. She disappeared toward the living room. Olivia turned to look at Daniel. "She's extraordinary," she said. "I know. She looks like you. She looks like her mother. She has your directness." He looked at Olivia. "Is that a good thing?" "It's my favorite thing about you," she said simply. "So yes." He turned back to the stove. They cooked together in the easy, slightly improvised way of two people who were in the same space for the first time, but had known each other long enough that the newness of it wasn't awkward. It was just the next version of something that had been building for a while. She handed him things when he reached for them. He told her where the plates were without being asked. They moved around each other in the small kitchen, without collision, finding the rhythm of it naturally. At one point, she was reading the back of the olive oil bottle for no particular reason, and he was checking the chicken, and they weren't talking, and the quiet was the good kind, the kind that didn't require filling. "This is nice," she said to the olive oil bottle. "Yeah," he said to the oven. "I don't do this," she said. "Cook. Be in a kitchen. With someone. Just being." She set the bottle down. "I do a lot of things with a lot of people, but most of it is purposeful. Most of it is toward something." She paused. "This is just here. This is just being here." He turned to look at her. "Is that okay?" he said. "It's more than okay." She met his eyes. "It's something I didn't know I was missing until I had it." He held her gaze for a moment. Then Sophie appeared in the kitchen doorway and said, "Is it dinner yet?" And the moment folded into the next one, the way moments did, each one making room for what came after. Dinner lasted 2 hours. Not because the food required it, but because the conversation did. Sophie had decided in her thorough and systematic way to find out everything about Olivia that she considered relevant, and her questions were the questions of a child who had never been taught to be indirect. She asked what Olivia's job actually was. Olivia explained it in terms Sophie accepted. She asked if Olivia liked it. Olivia said yes and sometimes no, and that was the honest answer about most things worth doing. Sophie approved of this. She asked if Olivia had grown up in California. Olivia said, "New York first, then California, then everywhere." And Sophie asked what everywhere meant, and Olivia explained about moving for school, and then for work, and then because the job was what it was. And Sophie listened to all of it with focused attention. Then Sophie said, "Do you have kids?" "No," Olivia said. "Do you want them?" "Sophie," Daniel started. "It's okay," Olivia said. She looked at Sophie. "That's a big question." "I know," Sophie said. "You don't have to answer if it's private." "No, Olivia paused, thought about it honestly. "I used to think that part of my life was too complicated for that, too full of other things." She looked at Sophie steadily. "I think I'm revising that opinion." Sophie thought about this carefully. Then, "My mom died when I was little. I don't really remember her." The table was quiet. "I know," Olivia said gently. "I'm sorry. Daddy talks about her sometimes." Sophie said, not with sadness, but with the straightforward matter-of-factness that she brought to everything. "He says she was funny and brave." She paused. "I think she would have liked you. She liked people who were honest." Olivia looked at Sophie for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful and genuine. "That's one of the nicest things anyone has ever said to me." "It's true," Sophie said, and went back to her chicken with the air of someone who had completed a necessary task. Daniel looked at his plate. He was not going to do anything embarrassing at his own dinner table. He took a breath and looked up and found Olivia watching him, and in her eyes was something that required no words and didn't ask for any. He nodded once. She nodded back. They finished dinner. He drove Olivia to her car at 8:30 after Sophie had gone to bed. Sophie, who had said goodnight to Olivia, with a hug that was brief and fierce and entirely unprompted. The way Sophie did everything, and which had clearly done something to Olivia that she was still quietly carrying when they walked out into the driveway. They stood beside her car. The night was clear and cool. "Thank you," Olivia said, "for tonight." "Stop thanking. I know." She smiled. "I can't help it. Old habit." She looked at the house, at the light in Sophie's window going dark as he watched. "She's going to be an extraordinary woman. She already is. She gets it from you." "She gets it from both of us," he said, and the U.S. landed between them without either of them choosing it, just emerged naturally the way the right word does when the right thing is true. Olivia looked at him. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah, I've been thinking about something." "Tell me." She turned to face him fully the way she did when something mattered. No deflection, no professional distance, just straight. "I've spent 3 years running something that wasn't built for me," she said. "I took it because it needed to be taken, and I was the one who could. And I'm good at it. I know I'm good at it. But there's a version of my life I stopped letting myself think about somewhere along the way. The version where I'm not always managing something. Where there's a table somewhere with real food, and someone I trust, and enough quiet to just..." She paused. "Just be." He looked at her. "I found that," she said quietly. "I found it in the most unexpected place. In a maintenance corridor I walked into by accident with a man who handed me directions and looked at me like I was a person before he knew anything else about me." She paused. "I don't want to lose it." "You're not going to lose it," he said. "How do you know?" "Because I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I told you that the first time, and I mean it more now than I did then. I have a daughter to raise, and a job I'm good at, and a life I've built from the ground up, and you are..." He stopped, found the words. "You are the thing I didn't have a category for, the thing I stopped expecting, and I am not at this point willing to pretend otherwise." She looked at him for a long moment. "You are the least expected person I have ever met," she said softly. "Is that good?" "It's everything," she said. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, just took her hand in his, the way you take something you intend to hold carefully. She looked down at their hands, then up at him. "One more thing," she said. "What?" "The sunscreen," she said. "On the beach." He looked at her. "What about it?" "I meant my shoulders," she said. "I actually did mean my shoulders." He stared at her. "But," she said, and the corner of her mouth moved. "When you froze, I realized that was the first time since I took over the company that someone looked at me like I was something more than a title." She paused. "So I let you think there was more to it than there was." "There wasn't more to it. There was everything to it," she said quietly. "It just wasn't what you thought." He shook his head slowly. "You were already gone," she confirmed. "Completely gone, right there on the beach." She looked at him with that honest, undefended expression she saved for moments that mattered. "I just didn't know how to say it without sounding like I'd lost my mind." "You could have just said it. You would have thought it was inappropriate." "It was a little inappropriate." "It was completely inappropriate," she agreed. "And completely true." She squeezed his hand. "Everything that has happened since has been me trying to say the thing I thought on the beach in a language that made sense in real life." He looked at her hand in his. "I thought about the beach, about the bottle of sunscreen, about her head tilting and the words that had stopped him cold, and the particular quality of the silence that had followed, and how he had spent the next several weeks trying to classify it as nothing when it had never been nothing. It had been the beginning, and beginnings, he was learning, didn't announce themselves. They didn't arrive with context or clarity or any kind of signpost that said, "This is the moment your life changes." They arrived small and sideways in wrong corridors and maintenance offices and terraces at dusk, wearing the ordinary clothes of everyday things. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. He let go of her hand, and she got in her car, and he stood in the driveway and watched the taillights until they disappeared at the end of the street. Then he went back inside. The months that followed built themselves quietly. Daniel's operational methodology pilot launched across the property in January, and by March had generated results that exceeded every projection in the proposal. Maintenance costs, down emergency response time, down guest-facing incidents at an 18-month low. The facilities director put him forward for a senior operations title. He accepted it with the same undramatic directness he brought to everything, signed the paperwork, and was back at his desk by noon. Marcus threw a department lunch. Daniel told him it was unnecessary. Marcus did it anyway. "You deserve it," Marcus said. "It's just a title." "It's not just a title, and you know it." Marcus looked at him. "When did you get humble about the wrong things?" Daniel looked at him. "Eat your sandwich," Marcus said. He ate his sandwich. Olivia restructured the CEO's advisory process, adding a formal operational advisory board that pulled department leads into strategic planning conversations. It was a real structural change, not a workaround, not a channel built for one person, but a process that made the company genuinely more connected to the ground it stood on. The board approved it unanimously. Business journalism found it interesting. 3 other hospitality groups called to ask about the methodology. Daniel read the coverage once and went back to the North Pool pressure gauge. The pressure was holding. He reported it as routine and moved on. The day that stayed with him happened in May on a Saturday in his backyard. Sophie had declared that they should eat outside, which they did whenever the weather allowed, because she liked it and he liked that she liked it. He grilled. She set the table with the focused ceremony she brought to domestic tasks that she had decided mattered. The backyard was not large and not impressive, and contained primarily a grill, a folding table, 4 mismatched chairs, and a lemon tree that Sophie had been monitoring for 2 years for signs of actual lemons. Olivia arrived with the cookies, as she had taken to doing, because Sophie had decided that cookies were her contribution, and she brought them without being asked every time. They ate in the early May evening, with the light going gold, and Sophie talking about a science project involving the water cycle and a shoebox and a frankly ambitious amount of plastic wrap. Olivia asked questions about the shoebox with genuine interest. Daniel grilled and listened and felt the evening move over him like water. At some point, Sophie went inside to get something she had forgotten, and Daniel and Olivia were alone at the folding table, with the remains of dinner between them and the lemon tree doing whatever the lemon tree did. "How are you?" Olivia asked. Not as a greeting, as a question. He thought about it the way he thought about things she asked seriously, actually honestly. "Good," he said. "Genuinely good. Not just functional. Not just functional." He paused. "You." She looked at the backyard, at the mismatched chairs and the lemon tree and the folding table with the remains of a simple dinner on it. And whatever she was looking at, she looked at it for a long moment. "I had a board call this week," she said. 2 hours of strategy and projections, and everyone performing their confidence in front of everyone else. She paused. "And I sat through all of it thinking about this, right here." She looked at him. "This table, these chairs, that tree that has produced 0 lemons in 2 years. Sophie's optimistic about this season." "I know," she told me. Olivia's mouth curved. "I'm rooting for the tree." He looked at her. "I used to think," she said slowly, like she was working it out as she said it, "that the way you knew something was real was that it had weight to it. That it felt serious and significant and required something of you." She paused. "But this doesn't feel heavy. It's the lightest thing in my life." She looked at him. "And it's the most real." He understood that. He had been trying to find words for that same thing for months. "I spent 6 years making everything manageable," he said. "Everything under control. No exposure, no risk, nothing that could catch me off guard." He looked at the table. "And then you walked into my corridor, and the most inconvenient thing in the world happened. What's that? I started wanting something again. She looked at him. Is that bad? She said quietly. It's terrifying, he said. And no, it's not bad. She reached across the table, and her hand covered his, and he turned his hand over and held it the way he had that night in the driveway, carefully intending to. Sophie came back through the screen door with whatever she had forgotten, a piece of paper. Something for the shoebox, and saw them at the table, and did not comment on the hands because she was 9 and direct, and had already made her assessment of the situation weeks ago, and didn't need to revisit it. She sat back down and spread her paper on the table and said, Okay, so the problem with the plastic wrap is the seal. And they both turned their attention to the very serious engineering challenge of the shoebox water cycle, and the evening kept going warm and ordinary and quietly extraordinary. Later after. Sophie was in bed, and Olivia was on the porch in one of the mismatched chairs waiting for her car. Daniel came out and stood beside her. She asked me something tonight, Olivia said. He leaned against the porch railing. Sophie. When you were grilling, she asked me if I was going to stay. He went still. What did you tell her? He said. Olivia looked out at the quiet street. I told her that was up to me and her dad. She paused. And she said very seriously, very Sophie, she said, I already asked him. He said yes. So now I'm asking you. He closed his eyes briefly. She did not do that, he said. She absolutely did. He could hear the smile in her voice. She really is your daughter. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Olivia turned to look at him. I told her yes. He looked at her. I told her yes, she said again, and it was not complicated, and it was not hedged, and it carried the weight of someone who had made a decision all the way with everything she had. Because it is. It's up to me, and the answer is yes. He stood in the porch light of his small house on his ordinary street, with the lemon tree in the backyard, and his daughter asleep inside, and this woman in a mismatched chair, who had walked into his corridor by accident, and refused quietly and persistently, and without ever making it dramatic, to walk back out. He sat down in the chair beside her. They sat together in the quiet of the evening, not saying anything, because nothing needed to be said. The street was still. Somewhere down the block a car passed. The lemon tree stood in the backyard, patient and unhurried, doing what it did. He thought about 447 alarms, and black coffee, and a life organized around not needing anything. He thought about invisible, and what it had cost him. He thought about sunscreen on a beach, and wrong corridors, and a birthday card in a mailbox, and the particular way she said his name, like it was the actual word she meant. I thought about Sophie, 9 years old, asking a billionaire CEO, "Are you going to stay?" and having the audacity to do it simply because she wanted to know the answer. He thought about all the doors he had told himself were locked. And he understood finally and completely that the man who fixed everything had spent 6 years failing to fix the one thing that mattered most. Not the grief, not the loss, not the absence. The believing. The believing that what he had was all he was allowed to have. That invisible meant safe. That small meant sustainable. That a man who drove an old truck and worked with his hands and raised his daughter alone and kept the lights on for people who never thought about it, that man had somehow already used up his share of something more. He had been wrong. And sitting on his porch in the May evening, with Olivia's shoulder against his, and the whole quiet, ordinary, beautiful life around him, Daniel Walker understood something that no amount of work orders or redundancy systems or carefully kept records could have taught him. The greatest things you build are not the ones you plan. They are the ones that find you while you are busy being who you are. And the only thing that was ever standing between Daniel Walker and the life he deserved was the door he had forgotten to try. It was open now. It had been open for a while. He just hadn't let himself walk through. He was through it now all the way, and he was not going back.